1995, two University of Pennsylvania psychology graduate students by the name of Martin Seligman and Stephen F. Meyer carried out an experiment, although highly unethical, on a group of dogs. Martin divided them into three groups, and when he rang his bell, he zapped them with electricity. Some could escape the shocks by releasing themselves from harnesses, other dogs could hit a lever, whilst other dogs weren't given a way out. And when the conditioning was complete, Seligman moved to the second phase of the experiment. The group of dogs that had no way of escaping the shocks were placed with the other two groups of dogs that could escape. Now, in this new box, the dogs could escape the shocks by simply jumping over a short wall to the other side of the box that was free of zaps. Interestingly, the dogs that were given the chance to escape in the previous experiment did indeed jump over the wall and evaded the pain, whilst the dogs that were not previously given an escape path surrendered to the shocks, barking in pain and passively waited for the shocks to cease. Due to their previous experience, they had developed a cognitive expectation that nothing they did would prevent or eliminate the shocks. This learned behavior, the belief that no matter what they did, they could not change their circumstance, was what Seligman termed learned helplessness or acquired despair. Similarly, in India, when elephant trainers catch a baby elephant, they tie its foot to a post, causing it to struggle for days in attempt to break free till it gives up when it learns that it's useless. In its later years, when that elephant grows to its full size, nevertheless, it does not attempt to break free, despite being strong enough to do so, and instead passively awaits the trainer to set it free because its mind has been broken and has learned that it is helpless. Helplessness is deeper than sadness. It is the belief that there is nothing that can be done to improve a bad situation that relates to you or others. Learned helplessness or acquired despair can affect individuals, communities, and nations at large. Similar to what befell the Muslims during the Mongol invasion, fear had gripped people in such a way that a Mongol soldier would enter upon a congregation and instruct them to wait, not to move from their places, till he goes out and finds a suitable rock to crush their heads. And they, in utter helplessness, would await their executor to arrive, to then slay them one by one without any resistance. Clearly, therefore, learned helplessness is not so much the product of the dramatic event itself, but more so the manner in which it is interpreted and reacted to. Those who interpret the pain of a particular happening in light of similar past experiences will plummet into a cycle of self-defeatist thinking because they've convinced themselves that the pain is simply unavoidable and that they have no control over the situation, and so they don't even try. Those, however, who interpret the pain as an opportunity for growth and success will remain motivated to overcome the challenge. So what then do you make of a person, a Muslim, who considers worldly pains as his pathway to paradise? So it's not the event that brings about helplessness, it's the interpretation of that event and how it is reacted to. When the coalition of pagans, an army of 10,000 men, which was arguably larger than the entire population of Medina, arrived at the city of Medina intending to put an end to the Muslim presence once and for all, one would expect a total meltdown in the Muslim midst and a prompt surrender. So intense was the hour that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, depicting the trial, هُنَالِكَ بِتُلِيَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ وَزُلْزِلُوا زِلْزَالًا شَدِيدًا. There, the believers were tested and shaken with a severe shaking. And above and beyond the military mobilization, there was another mobilization that was just as threatening to the Muslims, the psychological warfare employed by the hypocrites to demoralize the Muslims, one which the Quran exposed, saying, وَإِذْ يَقُولُ الْمُنَافِقُونَ وَالَّذِينَ فِي قُلُوبِهِم مَّرَضٌ مَّا وَعَدَنَا اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ إِلَّا غُرُورًا. And when the hypocrites and those in whose hearts is disease, they said, Allah and His Messenger did not promise us except delusion. The Muslims' reaction, however, was to their enemies completely baffling. They viewed the realities that were unfolding before them through a lens of breathtaking positivity. Allah said, وَلَمَّا رَأَى الْمُؤْمِنُونَ الْأَحْزَابَ, when the believers saw the enemy alliance. قَالُوا هَذَا مَا وَعَدَنَا اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ, they said, this is what Allah and His Messenger have promised us. وَصَدَقَ اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ, and the promise of Allah and His Messenger has come true. وَمَا زَادَهُمْ إِلَّا إِيمَانًا وَتَسْلِيمًا, and this only increased them in faith and submission. And with this stubborn insistence to not surrender to helplessness, along with the human means that they exhausted to the best of their limited ability, and above all their reliance upon Allah, the divine intervention arrived, as it always does. وَرَدَّ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا بِغَيْظِهِمْ لَمْ يَنَالُوا خَيْرًا, Allah drove back the disbelievers in their rage totally empty-handed. وَكَفَى اللَّهُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ الْقِتَالَ, and Allah spared the believers from fighting. So once again, it's not the event itself that brings helplessness. No, it's the way in which it is interpreted and reacted to. The learned helplessness concept helps explain many unfortunate happenings that affect the Muslims. A person who gives up on his arduously long search for marriage and in utter agitation chooses to fornicate. Or a businessman who, due to mounting pressure from family or friends or the market, cave in and reintroduce alcohol to their shops. Or those who insist that there's no point in Muslims being part of politics because of
time. Volunteering your time for something good in an act of gratitude will actually bless your time as well. Number 5, a daily recitation of the Quran, specifically Surah Al-Baqarah. The Prophet ﷺ said in an authentic hadith, recite Surah Al-Baqarah. When you do so, you are unlocking all sorts of barakah. And to abandon it is a form of regret. وَلَا تَسْتَطِيعُهَا الْبَطَلَ, and it cannot be penetrated or overcome by al-batala. Batala can be as neutral as laziness and as nefarious as sihr, as sorcery and magicians. And so the scholars say in regards to waqt here, in regards to time here, the longest surah of the Quran is Al-Baqarah. If you read it, the blessing that it unlocks in your life is significant. And so there is a general rule here that if a person has a daily recitation of the Quran, it will increase the blessing of their time. And specifically, of course, here, Surah Al-Baqarah that has been given to us. Number 6, incorporating remembrance into your routine. And that will increase what you earn in the hereafter as well as what you bless in this life. The last thing, dear brothers and sisters, keep the company of productive people. And there's a story I'll end with here. It's the story of Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma. One of my favorite stories of a young man who had a vision. It was very traumatic for him when the Prophet ﷺ passed away. But he also had an eye, and he had a heart that was looking for the pleasure of Allah. So when everyone came back to Medina, after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, all these Sahaba that had gone on journeys were all there in Medina, tells his friends, 13-year-old friend, 13-year-old Ibn Abbas, he says, hey, the ashab, the companions of the Prophet ﷺ are everywhere today. Let's go seek knowledge from them. And his friend is narrating the incident. He says that, I told him, you go ahead and do that. I'm going to keep playing and relaxing. Let's go play with the pigeons instead. Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma says, فَتَرَكْتُهُ, he said, I let him go, I left him, I went and I started to sleep on the doorsteps of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, collect ahadith, collect fiqh, their knowledge, their jurisprudence. Years later, they've grown up, and that man is walking by, and he's still playing with the pigeons as an adult. And Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma's house has become the first university in the history of Islam, saying, that young man knew better than I did. He got it. It clicked. Keep the company of productive people. Keep the company of people that are goal-oriented. Keep the company of people that are trying to get ahead. Work with them together. وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. We are all in loss, except for those of us who enjoin one another, push one another towards the truth, push one another towards enjoining good and forbidding evil, and patience and prosperity. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put barakah in our lives, barakah in our time, barakah in our rizq, in our sustenance, barakah in our deeds. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow that barakah to be embedded with His rida, to be embedded with His pleasure with us until we meet Him and we enter into paradise in the company of His beloved Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Allahumma ameen.